Today is Friday, November 6, 2009. My name is Julian Reitman, and it's my pleasure to interview today Herbert Gladstone at his home in Stamford as part of the Oral History Archive of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. I've been looking forward to this day, and I know Herb has too. We will now proceed. And I thought the first question that I would ask, unless you have any introductory remarks you wanted to make.
No, please
Good,
ask.
good. The first question that I would like to ask is, why did you come to Stamford?
In about 1954, I'd been traveling all over the world. I worked for a company called Food, Machinery, and Chemical. And we decided that it was time for me to stop traveling and to seek a place where we would want to bring up our kids for the rest of our lives. And so we searched between New York and Boston to find the most logical place to settle down. And I interviewed for about 20 different jobs and finally picked a job with a company called Consolidated Diesel Electric in 1955, January 55. And so I started work for that company on January 1st, 1955.
And in your consideration of Stamford, were you at all interested in the Jewish community here in Stamford?
Not at the time. We were more interested in being close to where my parents lived, which was New York. Sylvie's parents lived in Boston, and so we wanted to pick a place in between where both of our parents lived so we could be close to them. And that's why we picked Stamford. Though the Jewish community in Stamford at the time, in our opinion, had a minority population, it still suited our purposes in that we did see that they had a Jewish community.
Good. Okay, so now let's get a little bit about your background. You were born where?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, May 12th, 1924.
And you grew up in Brooklyn?
I grew up in Brooklyn. I spent most of my life before I entered service in Brooklyn. I went to PS 167 in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And from there I went to Samuel J. Tilden High School in Brooklyn and graduated at the age of 17 from Tilden.
And then what happened?
I then applied for various scholarships. I was accepted to Cornell and various other universities, but we were rather poor and we didn't have the money to send me to Cornell. And so I went to City College, which was a scholarship-free institution, and I entered college at an unusual time in that I started, instead of September, I started in May of 1941. And the reason for that is we saw the war was imminent. Hitler was going through Europe like a hot knife through butter, and we knew it would be inevitable. And so I joined the ROTC in May of 1941 at City College.
Was this uptown or downtown?
Downtown. It was the Baruch School of Accounting. My parents said, be a doctor, be an attorney, or be an accountant. And so I chose, with my dad's influence, to try to be an accountant.
What was your dad's field?
My dad was a furrier. He was an immigrant who came to this country with a very, very interesting story I don't know if you want this.
Sure, go ahead.
My father met my mother in Poland. They were both born in Lublin, Poland. And my mother decided that Poland was not the place to live. Times were harsh. And so she decided at the age of about 20 to come to the United States. And she was brought over to the United States by her uncle. My father was so disappointed that she left to come to the United States that he entered service in the Kaiser's army and became an officer. And one day he saw a ship that was going to leave from the port of Poland in Danzig to come to the United States. And the story as he tells it is he marched his 21 soldiers going AWOL onto the ship, told the captain of the ship that he was there to protect the cargo, and for 3 weeks they marched around on that ship protecting the cargo, got to Montreal, went down the gangplank, and that was the last my father saw of all 21 soldiers. They all dispersed. My father, according to him, never heard anything again from the Kaiser's army. Called my mother up in New York and said he was now in America, and would she somehow get him from Montreal to Brooklyn, to New York. And my uncle sent him money, and he said he went from Montreal without any problems at all going across the border. He spoke 5 languages, but didn't speak a word of English. Came across the border, took a train from Detroit to New York, and my uncle wouldn't permit my father to do anything with my mother until they immediately got married. And so no tiki, no washi, they got married, and they got married in 1922, and I then, 2 years later, was born.
You were the oldest.
I was the oldest, May 12, 1924. I have one sister who was born 4 years later, and we were the only 2 children from my parents. So that's how they came to the United States.
That's an interesting
Very
story.
interesting, yeah.
And in World War II, you went into the service?
In March of 1943, I was a lieutenant in the ROTC at City College, and the entire ROTC was called up. I was going to be a tank commander. I had never been in a tank. My training was in Central Park on a horse. I took an exam, and they decided in the United States Air Force's infinite wisdom that I would become a better meteorologist than to be a tank commander. And so they sent me to Hamilton College, and in 18 months I got a 4-year training as a meteorologist and became a meteorologist in the United States Army Air Force. And I was in various places in the United States. Started off in Keatsafield, Mississippi, and from Keatsafield, Mississippi, I went to Romulus Air Force Base, and from there went to Dalmabry Field, Florida, and from there went to Westover, and then in the Army Air Force's infinite wisdom, they decided that I would be better as a researcher and sent me to Harvard. And at Harvard, I and about 25 others discovered what was then called the jet stream. We knew that something existed above 25,000 feet, but we didn't know what it was. And so we designed a thing called radio sound, which was a unit that was sent up by a balloon that could give relative humidity, dew point, wind direction, temperature, and a whole host of other meteorological terms. And we discovered the jet stream while I was at Harvard. And while I was at Harvard, I met Sylvia. And that's another little story, but I'll make it quite short. I met her at a USO, and she reminded me of Ingrid Bergen and Grace Kelly. And I met her in 1945, and we got married in December of 46.
When did you get out of the Air Corps?
I got out of the Air Corps in January of 46, went back to school to get my MBA, and from there I started to work as a consultant with a company called the George S. May Company, and from the George S. May Company, Food Machinery, which was one of George S. May's accounts, hired me, and I joined Food Machinery for about 4 years, and from there left to join Consolidated Diesel Electric, which ultimately then became Condec Corporation.
In Condec, were there many Jews in the management?
In Condec, the president of Condec was a Jew. I was not the best candidate when I applied for that job. I was the second choice out of about 100 candidates. But the CPA that did the work for Consolidated Diesel Electric was Jewish. And the chap who was the first choice was Irish. And here's where discrimination worked in reverse. The accountant said he preferred working with me, and he influenced the president of Consolidated Diesel Electric to appoint me instead of the other chap. And so I started as chief accountant at Consolidated Diesel Electric, then became divisional controller, and after divisional controller became corporate controller, and after corporate controller became treasurer, and after treasurer ultimately got on the board and became vice president of Condec Corporation. And Condec grew from roughly 6 million when I joined them to over 500 million, of which I was vice president in charge of mergers and acquisitions, and I acquired 13 different companies for Condec, and that's how we grew.
What happened to Condec?
Condec was acquired in 1984 by Farley Industries. In the same way that we had acquired 13 other companies, we got swallowed up by a bigger company called Farley Industry. And after 31 years, that's when I was terminated at the age of 60 from Condec Corporation, having spent 31 years with them. And then ultimately, though I got a golden parachute when I left Condec, within a month I got a job with Cobra Electronics and became their executive vice president and stayed with them for 7 years until I retired from them to go into my own private public accounting practice, which I am still doing at the age of 85.
Well, we're making sure to do the interview before tax time.
Ah, I see.
When did you start getting involved in the local Jewish community?
Started in 1955 and became involved from the very beginning in the Jewish community. I got on the board of the Stanford Jewish Center, got on the board of the Jewish Family Services, got on various committees at the Jewish Center, and probably the most important event that I did for the Jewish community was acquiring the land for the Stanford Jewish Center. Over a 3-month period, I negotiated with the Nasilius estate to acquire the land for the Jewish Center, and single-handedly purchased that land. It was originally on the market for over $2 million, and by a series of quirks, I was able to, the Nasilius estate, they had died and had left their money to be distributed by the trustees of Nasilius, a chap by the name of Lewis Held, who I didn't know at the time was Jewish. And as we talked, and I found out that he was Jewish, I was able to twist his arm over a 3-month period. And since Nasilius wanted the money to be distributed to charities, and the trustee had the right to distribute it to the charities of his choice, I got the vast majority of the Nasilius estate and acquired the $2 million worth of properties in 1961 for under $500,000. And that's how the land was acquired for the Stanford Jewish Center.
And that was in 61?
1961.
Because building didn't start for many years.
Oh yes, it took us a great number of years. We were, when the decision was made to, it took a great number of years. We used the mansion that was on that property for about 4 or 5 years before we started to build the Jewish Center. And we then had to go out for fundraising. We tried to get $4 million in order to start to build the Jewish Center. And there was quite a bit of opposition. There was opposition from the people who lived next door, Pollock. There was opposition from various different organizations that didn't want us to build on Newfield Avenue. But we really prevailed. We got assistance from the attorneys in town that handled many of the lawsuits. But we ultimately got the $4 million. We started to build the property. And that's one of the proudest achievements I have, because I use the Jewish Center 2 or 3 times a week. And when I go in there and I see the kids, and I see the music, and I see the lectures, and the athletics that are at that Jewish Center, except for the birth of my kids and the advancement I did in my company, that's one of the biggest achievements I made. But there were other achievements too. I became the president of the Roxbury PTA. I was on the board of so many Jewish communities, including Jewish Family Services, the senior men's group. I was their vice president and program chairman, and joined the learning, became on the board of learning and retirement, became involved in a great number of committees in the Jewish community.
Were you involved at all in the zoning battle for the JCC?
Very much so. Alan Kamhai and I fought with zoning, we fought with environmental concerns. It was quite a battle in order to get the Jewish Center built. But frankly, after a great number of years, we prevailed, and that's, as I mentioned, one of my proudest achievements.
I'm just trying to think of who were some of the other people involved in that fight.
The biggest ones that Al Kamhi helped in the design, and he was in charge of the building committee. And one of the most influential people to get that building built. There was Ismakla, who helped on the legal battles, and his partner was name escapes me at the moment.
Leo Gold.
Leo Gold. They all contributed their services free to get the Jewish Center built. But the entire Jewish community really, every profession, fellows that were in finance, fellows that were in building, all contributed to getting that Jewish Center built.
Did you join the old JCC right after you moved to Stanford?
Yes. Yeah, I was in the old JCC, and we decided when I was on the board of the old JCC to sell the old JCC as a motivating factor to the Jewish community that we needed another place. And for many years we became a Jewish center without a building. And we operated without a building for a number of years after we sold the old JCC. And that was one of the motivating factors. We needed a building, and that's why the Jewish community got together and ultimately acquired this land and built it.
And were you instrumental in getting the tennis courts as part of it?
That came many, many years later. The tennis court was about the furthest thing from our mind. But when the Queskins offered to pay for the tennis courts, it was accepted very readily.
I didn't know that they had offered.
But you know, we had many problems. Let me describe just a single incident that's of interest. There was one group that wanted the Jewish Center closed on Saturday. There was another group that wanted the Jewish Center open on Saturday. One individual, whose name I won't mention, offered $500,000 to keep the Jewish Center closed. Another individual offered $500,000 to keep the Jewish Center open on Saturday. And so after a 2-month hassle, the compromise was reached. Both gave their $500,000 if the Jewish Center would stay open after 1 o'clock. So we opened the Jewish Center, closed it until 1, opened it at 1 o'clock, and for many, many years we operated Saturday half days with no organized activities Saturday afternoon, but the Jewish Center was open. In the last several years, the Jewish Center is now open from morning to night. But in order to get started, a whole series of compromises like that did occur. I must say that's one of my proudest achievements.
Did you have any sense that the community objected because it was Jewish, or just on the normal principle of violating zoning and so forth?
That's a speculation. My speculation is that they didn't want a Jewish community center. They didn't want it next to their property because of traffic. That is the Pollocks that owned the property next to it. But so many other churches were being built that particular area ultimately became, with the Italian Center, with the Greek Orthodox Church, and various other churches were built. I think we were the beginner, the forerunner of religious institutions being built on Newford Avenue. We started that.
Did you find any change in attitude after the the 6-Day War?
I don't think so. I think that when the Jewish Center got built, it just so flourished, and it just grew so well. To this day, if you go into the Jewish Center, we have as many Indians and blacks. It's non-sectarian, and it's probably the most influential and nicest place in Stanford, where people can go for cultural events, where the children go, where the athletic facilities, I don't know of another facility. It's as good as and better than the Tully Center. It's much better than almost any other facility in Stanford.
Now, to change the subject, for many years you taught at UConn.
Yes, I did. 25 years I taught in the MBA program, teaching finance, mergers and acquisitions, and taxation, and loved every minute of it. The students were age 83, they were bright, they wanted to advance in their companies. Most of them, by the way, were engineers, and engineers, as you may know, work with blinders on. They see things as black and white, and they probably do a good job, but they were so devoid in ethics, they devoid in knowledge of insurance, devoid in knowledge of finance, accounting, and so they took the MBA program in order to broaden their knowledge so they could advance in their companies, and that was their chief purpose. When I asked each of them what their objective was in taking this course, I got shocked when some of them said to me, look, just teach us enough so that we can get a job with Goldman and Sachs so that we can become multi-millionaires. And that became the biggest objective that most of them had.
And did you find a lot of change in how stores treated UConn and Stanford over the 25 years?
Well, I was only part of the adjunct faculty. I only taught one course a semester. So I really wasn't influenced by the politics. But when I listened to some of the other professors and the problems they had, it didn't affect me at all, because I wasn't interested in a pension from UConn. I was only interested in teaching that one course each semester. I never did become involved in some of the problems between stores and Stanford, but they did exist, because when I listened to Herb Spira and when I listened to, I forget his name at the moment, Kirkaroo, they all had problems, but I had none. They treated me very, very well. I didn't need the money I got from UConn, but I enjoyed the 25 some odd years that I taught there.
When did you join Temple Sinai?
Joined Temple Sinai in 1955. Sinai had started in 1954. Mr. Brady, who was the then treasurer of Consolidated Electric, was one of the founders of Temple Sinai, and he suggested to me that that would be a place for me to join. And since my wife was conservative and I was Reformed, we joined the Reformed Temple and grew with Temple Sinai from 1955 on. Lived through about roughly 7 rabbis, and liked most of them.
Any other comments
Any other comments on
on
it?
Sinai?
Well, I'm still with them. We go about 2 out of every 4 Friday nights when we have a ruah, which is a musical service. We attend every single one of them, including the one that's going to be tonight at the temple. We thoroughly enjoyed Rabbi Silva, became a very good friend of him, with him. I have good memories of Rabbi Silva because whenever my dad came to Stanford, and I'd bring him to Temple, and whenever Rabbi Silva came to our house, whenever we have a New Year's Eve party, and if my dad was there, they got into fierce discussions. My dad had been a Talmud scholar in Poland, and everything that Rabbi Silva did in Temple, my dad objected to, so that they used to have some very interesting discussions. I lived through many good rabbis at Temple Sinai, Stephen Pierce, Rabbi Rolla, and now Disick. So, yes, Temple Sinai is a place where we go to, and I've been on the board of Temple Sinai. I was the vice president. I was treasurer of Temple Sinai. So yes, I do love the place, and it's part of our everyday life.
Do you feel that outside the tax season, being an accountant, being in the accounting field, gave you the opportunity to participate in a lot of local activities?
Yes, I became involved in almost all of our local activities. Being president of the Roxbury PTA, I've been involved in, obviously, in the Roxbury Tennis and Swim Club. I played tennis to this day at 85 3 times a week. As you know, I, for 9 years, was club champion at Roxbury. I've participated in many tournaments. I've played in the over 80 tournaments in tennis. I've got quite a number of trophies. In fact, I don't know what to do with them downstairs, as we hope to downsize one day. We're thinking seriously one day of possibly going into Edge Hill. We made a deposit for Edge Hill, but I'm not quite ready to go into it.
When did you learn to play tennis?
I didn't play tennis until I was about 30. I was a handball champion, because that's what we did in Brooklyn. And there was a place called Lincoln Terrace Park, and I played handball, and across the street and the park were the tennis courts. And we looked upon the fellows that were playing tennis as the sissies. And what was the definition of a sissy? A sissy was someone who could afford a tennis racket and tennis balls. All I could afford when I was growing up was, if it was 2 cents to buy a little hard ball, handball, that was all we could afford. So I played handball until I was about 30. When I came to Stanford, first time someone asked me, look, why don't you play such a good game of racquetball at the Jewish Center. I've won some, as you may know, some racquetball tournaments in the Jewish Center. Someone asked me to pick up a tennis racket. I picked up the tennis racket, fell in love with it, and so it wasn't until really in the 30s that I became serious with tennis.
In growing up in Brooklyn, were you in primarily a Jewish area of Brooklyn? Most of your friends were Jewish?
We lived on St. John's Place, which was 2 blocks off Eastern Parkway. St. John's Place had a mixed culture and background. I didn't know the difference between white and black. Half the neighborhood was black. So that I grew up in a neighborhood where I played football, played handball with blacks, and I just didn't know any discrimination between blacks and whites when I was going to school. When I went to Tilden, about 25% of the class were blacks. I played football at Tilden, and it was a mixed community. I never knew discrimination when I was younger. We were all so poor that we became involved in athletics because that was all we could do.
Now, were you intellectually stimulated at Tilden? Was there some teachers that brought things to mind that created an interest on your part?
I was a precocious, athletic, bright young man. At Tilden, I was part of Arista. I didn't know anything about girls when I was going to school. I was only interested in athletics. My parents just told me that, you know, education was just so important that most of my efforts were devoted towards study and athletics. And I was influenced by many of the teachers in that in Tilden, the bright students were segregated from the lesser bright. And I took advanced courses in calculus and algebra, graduated high school in 3 years, got out of school when I was 17. So when I entered college, I was 7. In fact, in May of when I was 17, I was already in City College in the ROTC. I started early.
And what sort of Jewish education did you have growing up?
For a nickel a week, my mom and dad sent me to what was like a communist circle. It was a education in Yiddish, and so I went to what was the equivalent of a Jewish learning school while I was growing up, but I never had Hebrew lessons. I was not bar mitzvahed. I didn't get bar mitzvahed until I was 65 in Temple Sinai. So my education was basically what was taught to me from I forget what it was called, but it was a red-tinged background. I forget what it was, some sort of circle. But
Well, there was the workman circle.
It was a workman circle, that's
Yeah.
what it was, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and they emphasized Yiddish rather than Hebrew.
Yes, they did, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we ought to let you have some opportunity to wander in any area that you would like to deal with.
I made up a little list when you told me I was going to be, of some of the things that I had done. And I was a director of the Rainbow Theater. I At the Jewish Center, I was vice president and chairman of adult senior services. I was on their finance committee. I became a member of the most prestigious accounting organizations like the Financial Accounting Board. I worked with several people here in Stanford on the Financial Accounting Board. I was part of the International Executive Service Corps, sending people overseas and did the accounting work for the Executive Service Corps. I was a vice president of the Financial Executives Institute, and I was vice chairman and chairman of their Academic Relations Committee. In learning and retirement, excuse me, I taught a course in financial personal planning at Sacred Heart. For 1 year, I became a professor of accounting and finance. At UConn, I was part of the adjunct faculty for over 25 years as an assistant professor. I lectured at the American Management Association on finance. I was a grader in the American Institute of Accountants, grading CPA exams. I did that for 3 years, CPA in New York. I became executive vice president of COBA when I retired from Condec. At Hamilton College, I became a treasurer in the 50th reunion at Hamilton College. And by the way, at Hamilton College, I was only there 18 months, but every 5 years we had a reunion. I've attended every single reunion through my 65th year at Hamilton College, and fell in love more with Hamilton College than any other place. And the reason for that is that when I went to City College, it was in New York City. I had never been any place like Hamilton College, which was, when I went there, I thought I was in paradise. I was there with about 10% of the City College guys, and every one of the City College guys graduated in the top 10% of the class. But the other guys were hand-chosen from all over the country. But I fell in love with Hamilton College and became involved in all of their affairs over the 60 years.
Now, when you were growing up in Brooklyn, did your family have a car?
Not until about, I was about 16 years old, we had our first car. No, we couldn't afford a car. About 1938, when we were coming out of the Depression, and we had a rough time during the Depression. My dad was a furrier, and obviously during the Depression, women couldn't afford fur coats. But starting in about 1938, 1939, things got better with my dad, and that's when we got our first car. And in fact, I was 16 and my dad taught me to drive, and we didn't have a car, to the best of my memory, before I was 16.
And did you then use the car to visit different places outside of New York?
No, didn't use. The only time we used the car was to go to Rockaway Beach every summer to get out of the tenements. My mom and dad purchased a cooker lane. Now, a cooker lane is a one-room place with a community cooking facilities, and we lived in one room, my mom and dad, myself and my sister, in one room over the summer. And so I became a lifeguard at 17 in Rockaway Beach, and that's where we spent our summers.
Okay.
Some of the other things that I was treasurer of Temple Sinai, on the board of LIR. So those are some of the things that, the IRS and the AARP each year allowed me to do tax returns for seniors, and every Wednesday I would devote 4 hours to the First Presbyterian Church, helping people who could not afford to have their tax returns done. And I did that for about 5 years, and then supervised the other people that were doing tax returns when questions came up that they couldn't handle. And I did that for several years. I no longer do that. So those are some of the things that I'm proud of in what I did. And it's been a quite diversified life. Sylvia and I have traveled all over the world as part of the Financial Executives Institute. Twice a year, they would hold conferences. And we've had conferences in Hawaii, Japan, we had conferences in Singapore, in almost every major resort in the United States. Twice a year, I would go to all of these different places. And so we've traveled quite extensively through the Financial Executives Institute. And then on vacation, we've gone to Israel, been there twice to Israel. And so these are some of the other things that we have done. We have 3 wonderful kids. Our son went to Trinity College. From Trinity College, went to College of Physicians and Surgeons. I was saying that my son graduated at Trinity College of Physicians and Surgeons and became a cardiologist. Lives in Exeter, New Hampshire, and has 2 daughters, one of whom has now graduated medical school, and the other one is a housewife, and I am a great-grandfather, having 2 great-grandchildren from my son's oldest daughter. And then my other daughter, Linda, has 2 children, both of whom are in college now. One is at Southern Connecticut, and the other one is up in Plymouth, New Hampshire. My third child is Karen. Karen graduated at Vassar, got 3 master's degrees, and is now a doctor of optometry in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's about all I have with the 3 children.
Right. No, the next question was, where did they go to? Stamford High or Ripplemont or?
All 3 kids went to Roxbury School, Roxbury Elementary School,
right.
And from there went to Ripplemont. They all had public school education and got a great education here. They were all in the advanced classes in high school here, and all have done well. All 3 have graduated college and got master's degrees, and all have done very, very nicely.
Were they bar or bat mitzvah or confirmed at Temple Sinai?
All in Temple. All 3 were bar and bas mitzvah at Temple Sinai. All 3 were confirmed. My son is a complete agnostic. doesn't believe in religion at all, doesn't go to temple, won't go to temple with us. He has seen so much in his field of cardiology that he just doesn't believe in religion. Linda, our second child, is Jewish, married someone who's not Jewish, is bringing up the children Jewish. My son married a Episcopalian, and their children are being brought up as Episcopalians. Karen is the only one that attends temple and comes down here for Passover and will go to temple with us, so that with two of my children not having married within the Jewish faith, we don't have much Judaism in 2 out of 3 of our kids.
The last question I was sort of thinking of is, you mentioned that your dad influenced you to think of accounting. Had you considered any other choices, or was City College downtown an advantage?
My choice always was to become a doctor, which is why all of my children are in medicine. All of my nieces and nephews are in medicine. I've paid for all of their medical and college tuition. I believe, through my dad's influence, that I made a deal with all of my kids that anything that related to athletics, music, or education, I would pay for. And to this day, when my kids want a kayak, I pay for it. When they want to go to medical school or college, I paid for it. This was all influenced by my dad, who was I mentioned previously, a Talmud scholar in Poland, and he so believed in education that even though as poor as he was during the Depression, I wanted to be a doctor, but we couldn't afford it, and that's why I ended up in City College. And as you know, City College, in my day, you started out with an A average, or an average mathematically, at 100, and when I entered City College, everybody that was in City College had a grade average of over 88. Give you an idea of what City College was like.
I think before we wrap up, any comments on the Stamford community overall that you'd like to make?
I have been all over the United States when I was with Food, Machinery, and Chemical. I spent much time in Modesto, California, Lawrence, Kansas, Green River, Wyoming, Los Angeles. These are plants that Food Machinery had. And in looking at all the communities that I have been in, the Stamford community is just about the best in this country. The opportunities that this community offers is just, it is superb. This is a wonderful community to grow up in. There are more things to do in this community than we can do. We have to establish a priority of the things we want to do. There are 2 or 3 or 4 things every single day that we have to make decisions on what we want to do. So in answer to that question, I've been around, there are very, very few communities that are as good as this community.
I think that's an excellent summary, and we thank you very much.
I thank you for being a good interviewer and giving me an opportunity to sprout. And I had an opportunity when you called to have me do this, to look back on some of the things that I've done, and I was just amazed when I look back at some of the things that I've done over the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And I'm just pleased with myself.
Well, I'm thinking that as this is part of an archive, who knows, maybe 20 years from now some sociologist will be very interested in doing research.
Well, I did this for a completely different reason. I did this because you indicated to me that I would get a copy of this, and I wanted my grandchildren who have asked me questions about, Dad, what did you do? What did you do during the war? Tell us a little bit about your grandparents. And this has given me an opportunity of having them have something. So that's
But the way the interview is conducted, we look at it much more from the community point of view than the family history.
Oh, I'm aware of that.
And that's, part of our goal is to get, you're giving us a different insight than we get from somebody else, and we're trying to make that mosaic.
Please, and I thank you for having asked me.
Thank you.